This is Brett Allan, host of the Brett Allan Show, a pop culture podcast, and you are listening to Spoiler Country, an amazing show.
In a world of podcasts, one rises in the night to destroy them all. The elder god in an ocean of noise, the Cthulhu of the airwaves. This is Spoiler Country.
Hello, listeners of Spoiler Country. Today on the show is the fantastic host of the Brett Allan Show, Mr. Brett Allan. How's it going, sir?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me. Excited to be here and talk with you. And yeah, you have a great show, so I'm excited and honored to be a guest.
Oh, thank you so much. The feeling's mutual. Your show is fantastic. For our listeners, Brett Allan hosts a fantastic show, the Brett Allan Show, or also known as Open Mic. And you have some phenomenal guests that have been on your show. I have been envious of your guests for quite some time.
Yeah, it's interesting how it all works. It's like, and I'm sure we'll get into our conversation here, but I appreciate the kind words.
Yeah, I will say you're one of the few people on Facebook who I have on that special list where I always check in on you. It's like, who does Brett Allan have now? I feel very competitive. Like, oh, Brett Allan has Howie Mandel? Jesus Christ. I need Howie Mandel on my show.
Yeah, it all comes down to timing, I think, because you've had people on your show as well, excuse me, who, Thomas Jane and all of these, John Heder. And it's interesting because, like, as competitive as this realm of podcasting and niche might be in particular, it's really all a timing thing, I think. And what the guest or the publicist or manager is looking to do for their particular talent. So it's interesting how it was just easy because I had Joel McHale on before that, and they share the same publicist. So it was just a matter of going in and asking, hey, is he available? So, but I hear no all the time. And that's the thing I always tell people. It's like, you just never know what the answer is going to be. So my message has always been, just go for the ask because you never know.
I totally agree. I find that on the side of the public side of public relations side of what we do, because like I said, you're also your host, you're also your editor, everything else. We'll go into that a little bit. Is that I find getting guests sort of like playing baseball, where
Yes.
you're going to fail way more than you used to see. Your batting average is probably not going to be 500. You're not breaking Honus Wagner's batting average records or anything with these things. It's pretty much a numbers game.
Yeah, I would say that's really it, because I've gotten emails before for people who have been pitched to me, and I'll say yes. And then it's like pulling teeth to try and get them on your show. So, and these are from reputable PR agencies in the business. It's interesting because sometimes I wonder if they just go down the list and, just try and grab the person who responds the first and the fastest, and then you get them booked. So it's interesting how it really works because it is a numbers game. And, although there are things that go into it as far as like statistics and how you're pitching your show and what you're doing to get the attention of the publicist or the manager or the talent, it really is a statistical thing, because I've reached out to people simultaneously along with other folks to get somebody on my show, and they get a yes and I get a no. So really, it's just like, you never know. It's a timing thing, or sometimes I just don't hear back from anybody. So I always tell people, it's always okay to just make the ask, but don't take the rejection personally, because it's not like other podcasting genres where you get people, and you might get that where they're making the circuit, they're doing interviews and stuff like that. And, it could be one of these, professional guests that I like to call them, but It really is a numbers thing. And you have to keep that in mind when you're reaching out and trying to get people on your podcast. And you can't take the no's or the rejections, so to speak, super personally.
I agree with you completely. And I think you kind of mentioned a little bit as well, is what I call the void. There's sometimes a moment in getting your guests where it seems a very extended time of just nowhere. And I don't know how you look at your guests, but sometimes I'm planning on my guests, I think of it almost like a tier system. And I have guests who at a level where I think I can definitely get this guest where are the wishful thinking guests, things of that nature. And it seems like a void where even the ones you think you're going to get are no. And and how 100%. Do you handle that void when you fall into that, when that happens to you?
Well, you just, again, it goes back to what I said before. You can't take it personally. So really, I go for the ask. And sometimes if I don't hear anything back, I may follow up once or twice, but I don't get super pushy about it because this industry, as big as it is also very small. So a lot of these people jump from PR firm to PR firm. So you never know what it is. I emailed somebody one time who works for a fairly large agency, and I asked her, I was like, how do you guys decide? And she told me it's very subjective. It depends on the scope of what kind of press the talent wants. Some are very particular about what they want. Some don't care. Some want to be asked beforehand. Some don't care. They'll just do any kind of press that they can do. It also comes down to if or what they might be promoting currently and how small that window is for them to be doing press. So, yeah, I call it the Hollywood no or the Hollywood yes, where I just don't hear anything back. But I certainly, have learned to not take it personal. You might get somebody that I asked for. I might get somebody that you asked for. We both might get the same person. And so it just depends. But really, I think consistency and hard work is key and what wins in the game.
So how do you feel about following up? Is that something that you regularly do if you don't hear back? Do you just let it go if you hear nothing? How much do you pursue a potential guest or potential publicist?
It really depends on the guest. Like, I don't want to be obnoxious or annoying. I use a program called Rebump where it works with Google, and essentially I send out the first email. It works with Gmail only, and then 5 days later, it sends a reminder. And then 10 days later, it sends another reminder. And that's it for me. Like, the only time I might be pushy is if somebody promises me something and then they don't follow through, which happens a lot. So I'll send an email and I'll say, hey, what's going on here? This went cold. Where are we at with this? And then a lot of times they might just respond back and say, well, if I get interest on this, I will let you know. So it really depends because you don't want to upset somebody to the point where you're being obnoxious. Because really, there's different tiers of press that these people do, all the way from like the talk shows to the podcast. So again, you don't want to piss somebody off. So again, I go back to that whole system of Rebump that I use, and it just kind of sends a gentle reminder and boosts the email. And then again, if it's somebody that says, like I said, yes, and they just ignore me, I might be a bit more pushier.
I will totally say, I think, as you said, the Hollywood note, I find that dealing with, because we do a lot of podcasts as well with comic book guests, artists, and we do a lot with the celebrities. I find it fascinating sometimes the amount of times you get, this person is interested, and you say, okay. And you say, fantastic. When can we schedule this? And then it goes quiet and remains quiet. I find that to be a fascinating thing that happens in the world, I think, of celebrity versus when we are entering the world of comic book guests. Yeah,
it happens a lot because, I think sometimes they just say yes, just to say yes. And then again, if something bigger comes along, you're going to get bumped. I think that's what happens. I don't know. I don't know because I've had lots of people say, yes, they want to do it. And then I don't hear anything ever. And then I follow up. I've been trying. Well, I was promised somebody 3 months ago and I still haven't been able to get them on my show. So, and every time it's like, I think too, part of it is probably because you're emailing the publicist or manager and then they're reaching out to the talent. I don't ever, and this is my personal practice, I don't ever go through somebody directly through a DM because it takes away the accountability for the talent, because then they can say yes or no or do whatever the heck they want. And there's no level of accountability with that person. So I don't send DMs. I've done it maybe once or twice, and it's always been contact by manager. So the manager and PR are there for a reason, to mitigate the communication and to hold the talent accountable if in case they don't show up. But even then, I've had guests book and then they never show up. So I've been stood up a lot. But I think a lot of times what it comes down to personally is the PR is doing their part, but they're not really forcing the guest or the talent to commit, I think is what happens. Or they get an email and they just ignore it, or they overbook the person and they're like, now they're on a TV show and they're doing something and they just don't have the availability.
Yeah, I do think a lot that's something that does occur. There's also there's a big celebrity I actually somewhat hinted at that we were going to have on the show maybe 3 weeks ago. We got that the guest wanted, the publicist said yes. The publicist of the studio that they were working for said yes. We're going to set this up. And we're like, yeah, definitely. And so let's come up with the dates and blah, blah, blah. Totally ghosted after that. Right. And part of me is thinking, why that happened. It kind of goes in your brain. But I also think a lot, and I think some of times we don't always recognize that they're also extremely busy. You know what I'm saying? The amount of emails they probably received, it probably takes a higher level of organization to maintain their life and their responsibilities than we think is happening. You know what I'm saying? They probably have hundreds of people they've probably said yes to, hundreds of potential opportunities for interviews. And I imagine it's quite easy to slip through cracks.
Yeah, that's why I said it's very subjective, I think, for the agency and for the talent, because obviously the biggest reach and the most exposure is always going to be key. If it's somebody that is just doing press nonstop, like it happens, but like, yeah, I think they probably just get overbooked and can't do it. And unfortunately, what happens is you don't ever hear back. And it's just because I think we get washed under the pile. And that happens a lot. And you just can't take it personally. I'm not saying you do, Jeff, of course, specifically, but some people do. And they look at it as something that you've done wrong or something you've said. And it's not necessarily that. And sometimes I think, again, it's a numbers game. It's like, this person's doing press. Let's get as much exposure as we can. Or sure, they'll do it. And then maybe they go to the guest and the guest says, well, I didn't agree to this. The one that frustrates me the most is when they say, let me ask about this, but are you willing to take this person in exchange? And I've done that a few times. Yeah. And it winds up getting me burnt. So I don't really do that anymore. It happened just recently. So it's like, okay, are you just putting me off to put me off, or are you genuinely asking to ask and just not getting a response, or are you just kind of blowing me off to blow me off?
I think a lot of that you think has to do with building a relationship with that publicist, right?
Sure.
So you think the exchange is going to build that relationship, or they're trying to test you out to see what you are. But I do find, I think, as I agree with you, that quite often that switch is a intentional switch to get that less well-known name onto a show with no intention of the return. You know what I'm saying? Getting the other guests, switching
100%.
back to the other guests.
There's no question about that.
It's a bait and switch. Is kind of what I was getting at.
Essentially, yeah. And the thing is, too, is like they're not necessarily agreeing to get that other person on, but they're saying, I will ask, and they might maybe be asking. But the other thing, too, the flip side to that coin is you never know who else the publicist might have to ask to get permission to get that person on. So, like, a lot of managers have final say on what kind of press their talent's going to do. So there's that part of it, too, which I have found that, yeah, the PR can say yes, but the management has to sign off too. It could be also who else you've had on the show before, and maybe them agree politically, or maybe they don't feel it's a good fit. I mean, there's a lot of things that can go into that decision-making process, I've learned.
And I think I don't know how you approach it, but obviously a lot of times the ask of the guest is trying to find out what they want to talk about. Because I will say there's certain people, let's say from like I talk to a lot of Star Trek people, and you go back to, let's say, the old series, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, stuff like that. And you kind of want to talk to them because you want to kind of discuss Deep Space Nine, but Deep Space Nine is 30 years old, and some people don't want to talk about Deep Space Nine anymore. And so how do you try to figure out what it is that they want to be asked and what they want to talk about?
Well, I think obviously whatever they're doing currently is important. And I always tell people that, whatever they're working on now, that's what we're going to talk about. But if they're on a show, like you said, that was on 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, it depends. Like I had Marion Ross. Obviously, everybody knows her as Mrs. C from Happy Days. But
it's a great get.
Yes. But how much about that can you talk about? Well, I mean, she's almost 90 years old. So she has talked about that, but she can talk a lot about other things too. But she knows that people are going to ask her about Happy Days, right? That show hasn't been on in 40, 50 years, whatever the case might be. So it's kind of finding that balance. I always want to talk about whatever is current for them. That's obviously important to me. And then if they're not promoting anything, I just talk about their career or maybe, kind of their processes or what they've been up to, just I always try and put it up front about what I want to discuss. And then, another example is Michael Fishman, DJ from the Connors, and his publicist was like, well, can we talk about his current roles and his current titles that he carries? And then if you want to talk a little bit about the Connors or Roseanne, also please kind of try and avoid anything about his marriage or his kids, unless he leads it and talks about it. So you really just kind of have to do your research and find out what they're doing currently.
Is it hard for you to not ask the question you want to ask because you don't think the guest wants to go there?
No, not at all. I mean, I've been told hundreds of times to not talk about certain things. Keep it, don't make it personal. These are the things that you can discuss. I'm not really a gotcha type interview, so I'm not going to ask that anyway. But, sometimes they wind up talking about personal things that you didn't expect them to. So you just never know how the conversation's going to.
Well, I don't mean by God. I've had a couple of guests, I'm not going to say the names or whatever, who I discussed a certain topic with, right? And they've actually asked, as during the, don't mention this, which is kind of what you kind of wanted to talk about. Like I said, going back to an older program, show, movie, or whatever, and you're like, kind of have to hold yourself back. Like, I want to ask that, but I can't because I can tell my guest does not really want to discuss that past whatever.
Yeah, I mean, really, you just have to. I mean, I don't really know. I've never really had that happen necessarily, but I think it just comes down to being prepared as a good interviewer, a journalist even maybe, and really just having all your ducks in a row about what you can and can't discuss. So I think it comes down to personal restraint as a podcaster. Anybody knows that, you might want to ask it. I've never been told don't talk about this at all. Because if it's a part of somebody's past, like they have to kind of be used to talking about it. So really, what else can you discuss? Well, you can talk about what they've been up to, kind of their processes, coming up with other types of questions if that answers your question.
Are you preparing questions in advance of your guests? Or how many questions do you prepare?
I put talking points together. Obviously, if they're promoting a project, that's going to go first. 9 times out of 10, most publicists will tell me they're promoting this, they're promoting that. So these are the things that you can talk about, right? Unless they say, please put these questions down in advance, which I've had happen before. So I write up all the questions, email it to PR. I've never been told no about anything. And then we just kind of work our way down with the questions. But sometimes, we might get off topic. That happens too.
Now, as I kind of mentioned earlier, you're a one-man show.
Yes.
You are doing research. You're doing the interview. You're doing the editing. You basically, you do your own marketing, I imagine, as well. So And am I understanding correctly too? This is full-time, your full-time job. Is that
No,
correct?
I'm in sales. I mean,
Okay.
it is full time. I do everything. I've tried farming it out to other people and it just doesn't work. But I have a schedule, I do 4 episodes a week, Monday through Thursday, and 1 or 2 video clips. And I'm always constantly cycling and promoting. And then I'm obviously sending out emails all the time. But yeah, I mean, I set, I have a plan. I'm going to do an episode on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And while I'm recording, I try and keep things as tight as I can. So I have to don't do a lot of editing.
So how much of your day how do you divide your time between the interview, the research of the guest, contacting the guest, which is its own task as well, which, so how do you divide your time that way?
Well, I mean, I send emails at night, usually 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. If I'm watching TV, I'm going through IMDb Pro, which is what I use. I'm kind of looking to see who I want to talk to, going through Instagram. I do a lot of my emailing at night, and then I respond in the morning first thing, look and see who's emailed, a couple hours after work, putting an episode together or getting up early and doing it that way. And then just, finding pockets in the day to promote.
When you are looking for your guests, are you looking for the guests that you want to talk to or the one you think your guests want to talk to?
I would say it's probably 60-40. 60% of what I'm looking for, what people are promoting, what's being pitched to me, and then just emailing people who I think I would want to have on. So it's kind of a mix. But, I've never had somebody say you should have this person on or that person on. It's usually who I find interesting or who I know would be a good fit for my show.
How long, for listeners to know, how long have you been doing the Brett Allan Show for?
Well, I mean, it's had several iterations, but I've been podcasting for a little over 3 years.
3 years? So
yeah.
Obviously in those 3 years, you've definitely had to hone your skills as an interviewer, which I think is definitely a very specific skill set. So
yes.
To you, what skills do you think are absolutely necessary for a host to have as a good interviewer?
Well, you have to be a listener. It's a conversation. You and I are having a conversation. Even though I can't see you, I'm listening to what you're saying to me. I'm listening to your voice. I'm listening to your tone. I'm listening to how you're asking questions. So to me, that's important, right? Same goes when you're talking to somebody, having the undivided attention and really listening to what they're saying. I think that's important. Being prepared, knowing about your guest, doing as much research as you can, maybe, writing questions down if that's your thing, at least having talking points, right? At this point, unless somebody asks, I don't write much down, very little to nothing. I might have their one sheet in front of me, or I might have like their website in front of me, but I kind of have a vibe of what's going on. So I'm looking at body language, how the guest is responding. But I think if I had to answer that with one thing, I would say it's just being a good listener. There's communication is listening, is giving and receiving, listening and responding, not talking over people and not cutting people off. You can always wait for that person to answer. I think what makes me different is that I just kind of let people talk. It might be a 5 or 10 minute answer. It depends on the guest. So I think that is important.
So I imagine, as someone who, once again, is a very successful podcaster, I assume you do listen to other people's podcasts as well.
All the time.
All the time. Is there something that you think most interviewers lack that they are probably not even aware is what they're lacking in?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of times, a lot of podcasters, I'm not specifically talking about anybody, it's like a competition, between the guest and the host, if that makes any sense, right?
Oh, definitely does.
The guest is talking about something, and then instead of you responding and communicating with them, you're like trying to one-up them or up-show them, right? So it's like, or name dropping a lot, I think can be horribly annoying. When you start talking about other people that you've had on the show, and I think when it becomes a competition, and I think it's subconsciously something that we do that we don't think about. And I think it comes down to honoring the moments that you have with that person, because if it wasn't for a podcast, you probably wouldn't be having these kinds of conversations. So really, I think, it's just being a good listener and not being competitive with the guest or trying to show them up. I know it sounds kind of weird. I don't know how else to explain it, but like if you listen to certain podcasters, you notice they have a cadence and a rhythm to how they do things. And if you really are listening closely, one of the greatest interviewers of all time, I think, is Bryant Gumbel. He is one of the best interviewers. And if you ever want to watch how to do a good interview, Bryant Gumbel is great. David Letterman, my next guest on Netflix, is great. Howard Stern is an amazing interviewer. Like outside of some of the weird questions that he asks, like he's an excellent listener. He's very inquisitive. He's always asking questions, and he has a way about making people feel comfortable.
And I think that's a fantastic answer. I think, and I don't know if that's something you consciously made a thought about, is that as an interviewer or a podcaster, I think you do have to determine, is your goal to be the star or to help your guest be the star?
Yeah. I mean, the people are obviously listening because of you, the podcaster, your brand. People are listening because they want to hear Jeff, right? Not necessarily that you have this amazing guest, because I've had some amazing people on my show and they underperform like you wouldn't believe. So I think one of the biggest fallacies that we find in podcasting when we start out is that we think if we're going to have this amazing celebrity on our show, it's going to make us famous or it's going to make us this. And that's not the case at all. Because even with like Howie Mandel, here name dropping, just as an example, it's not really about that person. It's about, what can I get out of them? And that person's been interviewed a bajillion times. So I think if you have to have the right mindset when you set out to do this, because if you think that person's, and it could get you or it could be one of the worst episodes that you've ever done. So you just don't know. Like the guest of your dreams can be the biggest a-hole on the planet. And it could be a very uncomfortable interview, like super awkward, super uncomfortable. And they're being professional just to get through. Right. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it totally does. And I think there are a lot of intangibles for those people who do podcasts like we do, which is obviously interview-based podcasting. A lot of intangibles, such, especially in terms of your guest, such as, does the guest themselves push your podcast? Do they retweet? Do they post out? I find the bigger names often don't.
Nope.
And I find that very frustrating. I think you probably do as well. And also I think a lot of the bigger names are big into canned responses.
Yeah. I mean, if you have somebody who is doing press for a movie or a television show, like they are there to talk about that. That is what they're there for. I had somebody on the other day and I was like her 12th interview for the day. So she told me, "You're my last interview for the day, so be nice to me." And she was joking around a little bit, but really, like, I don't know. It was Mickey James, the 6-time WWE world champ, right? And everybody's talking to her about being released, and everybody wants to know about why they sent all of her belongings in a trash bag to her. We didn't talk about any of that. That was not one single part of the conversation, because she's done a million interviews about that. So I want to talk to her about her family, her music, like what is important to her. And people get irritated. I get text messages. How do you get people? If there's one thing that drives me nuts in podcasting and in these podcasting groups is, why won't my guest share the episode? It's not their job to do that. That is not their job. Their job is to show up on time and give a good interview. That is their job. That's it. That's not their job. And it's not their publicist's job to make them share the episode. And if there's anything that I could scream from the mountaintops, is your job is to find the cake. Your job is to buy the ingredients for the cake, to make the cake, to bake the cake, and to sell the cake. It's all of your responsibility. Now, if they do like a retweet, I think Twitter's good because If they want, they can retweet it. You know, if you make it easy for the guest to share the episode, give them graphics. I always send things to PR because they asked for it. Like today, I had a guest who shared something, but you can't go into it. It is frustrating, and I tell my friends this all the time, but you can't hold them responsible or culpable for doing that because it's not their job. They're the celebrity. They're there to do the interview. Like, you land Thomas Jane, god dang, good job for you, man. Like, that's a huge get.
Thank you.
His job is to show up, smoke his cigar, do a good interview, and then that's it. He's done his job. These people that do these press junkets, their job is to show up, talk about, Fast and the Furious, talk about this and that. That's why you notice a lot of these TV segments are like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I try not to go over 25 minutes, like, unless the guest is just a talker, right? So you just have to keep it brief and bright. You have to keep it interesting. And if you want to get into this genre of podcasting, you got to have a thick skin and just go with the flow, because that's just how it is. I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, I agree with you so much. I mean, I'm not one who usually says preach, but go right ahead. Because I honestly think that when a guest comes on your show, they are coming on your show to use your number of guests and listeners to promote their stuff and add to their visibility. They're not there to boost your visibility. You know what I'm saying? They already have their guests.
It's not their job to do that.
Right. And their listeners are already theirs. They don't need to promote to themselves because they already got them. They're trying to take yours of people who they don't have and build. So yeah, I agree with you 100% that their job is to be boosted by you. You're not going to be their job is not to boost you as the podcast.
No, I mean, if they want to share it, be excited about it, that's fantastic. If you really do a bang up job and they want to share it on their social media, fantastic. But it's not their job. It's not their responsibility. Their job is to show up and do the interview, and that's it. And that's the problem in podcasting, is there's this quid pro quo that we have. And sometimes it's true, amongst podcasters. That's why, it's hard for me to go on somebody else's show, because I feel like there's an unspoken agreement that now, because I came on so-and-so show, now I have to have them on my show. I'm not talking about you. I'm just saying, like, generally speaking, right? Because I have a lot of people that reach out to me, and I'm very selective about, who I say yes to, because it's just exhausting. And like, if it doesn't fit my genre, if it doesn't fit my brand, then you're not coming on my show. Like, I would have you on, obviously, because we share the same type of thing. But like, if I go on some like mindset podcast or like brand builder show, and they want to talk to me about this or that, and kind of more of the nuts and bolts of how to build relationships, then I'm very clear and upfront, because, it's different, right? But we just have to be careful about what we, agree or don't agree to.
Well, talking about your brand does it, you do it exceptionally well. And I'm highly envious of you for this. You do exceptionally well with getting stand-up guests. That you're the number of great stand-ups that you've had on your show is an immense number. You've had, like we said, Harry Mandel, George Wallace, I believe, as well as your guest, and you have had so many of others. What is it about your show that you've been able to build a great host of stand-up guests?
Well, I mean, it started in the pandemic last year. I was able to book Lisa Lampanelli, who was a comedian. She's not doing comedy anymore, but that was really like a recognizable name. It's just, comics are very easy to get unless they're like super huge. It's just like building a resume, and it's just going for the ask. It's the best way I can describe it, putting out all the information necessary for them to make a decision. But usually when comics see that you've had other comics on, it's easy to get them. Like, it's like probably getting a comedian is way easier than getting anybody else because they just have a lot of stuff to talk about and they want to come on and rant or they want to talk about this or that. Yeah, I would say I have so many comics just because they're easy to get. Like it's easier than you might think, you know, unless again, I mean like a Jerry Seinfeld or whatever, but like, and the more recognizable names, then obviously the easier it's going to be to get other people. But I don't know. And then it's building relationships with comics and staying connected with them and, you know, maybe asking for a favor or two. But really getting a comedian is, again, I've had so many just because it's so easy and they're fun to talk to.
There is a linked aspect where the one gets you the next, which gets you the next.
Very much so.
How hard, I mean, when you do have a comedian on your show, do you feel a need to try to keep up with them? In other words, because a lot of comedians I imagine are pretty rapid fire because they're so used to it.
You just have to be yourself. You know, that's it. It comes down with anything. Like, yeah, they're on, but then some of them aren't on, you know, like some of them are just happy to talk about anything. Like podcasters and comedians, that's why podcasting is so popular with comedians is because they can just go on and talk about whatever they want. And it's just part of their DNA, right? And so, yeah, I mean, like somebody like a Joel McHale, you have to be on your toes, but also you can't let them, you know, they're obviously they're going to be nice to you. They're not going to be a jerk. They might let a little of their persona out that they might be known for, but it's got to go with the flow, you know, and that's what it comes back to, being a good interviewer and a good listener and just paying attention to what they're doing.
Is that part of your pitch when you're going to a publicist? We've had on the show A, B, and C. I guess 100%. Top 10 or 12 guests that I've had, biggest names. Yeah, it's a resume. It's like applying for a job. 100% I do. Another thing, obviously, that you said is very important is building the relationship with the publicist. Yes. So how do you go about building that rapport? Is it just, I got your guest, this is how it went well, you give me the next one? Or is there something else you're able to do to maintain that relationship between guests?
I just check in with them every once in a while, let them know how episodes are doing, if they have anybody. It comes down to just building a good trust and a good relationship with that person. That's it. You know, it's like anything else. It's like if somebody's nice to you and they're interested in you more than just like a transactional relationship, it's going to come through. So, yeah, I mean, it's just taking time to do. Like I can email probably 5 or 6 people that I can think of offhand, or I could literally ask them for anybody. Now that doesn't mean I'm going to get them, but I can ask and they'll tell me yes or no, right? There's some that I don't work with at all because they're just impossible to deal with. And I know it's always going to be a no. So really, like, it's just learning to connect with people and build relationships. But yeah, I mean, I always thank them. I always tell them, you know, this was great. I always give them copies. Like sometimes I keep them updated, and I've just gotten to know a lot of people. And so I just stay connected with them and keep those relationships thriving.
And I think another thing that a lot of new podcasters obviously are probably dying to know from someone who's been successful is, and I think it's a skill that's hard to learn because most of us aren't trained in it, marketing. How do you market your show to build that audience? Is there a secret that you have? Is there certain platforms you use or don't use?
Just what everybody else is doing. Look what other people are doing. Success leaves clues. Like whatever somebody always maximize it. You know, I focus on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, but I get the most traction there. But that doesn't always equate listen. So I always do a video clip. I always do an audio clip. I just promote it and keep pushing it over and over and over again. Like there's no secret sauce. It just comes down to maximizing every piece of content that you can. And you have to do that. Or, you know, you can't expect that success if you're not putting the hard work in. And, you know, you just have to market the hell out of it. And that's Instagram. Sometimes doing anything that you can. I mean, obviously I love Instagram. Twitter's okay for me. Whatever you're experiencing the most success in, that's the platform you need to stick with, I think.
So how do you ride the peak and plateaus of marketing? I'm someone who tends to be obsessive over listenership numbers. Like I check all the time, or at least ask our guy who has the numbers all the time. And I find that it's such a psychological wave because
Yes.
it goes. It's not just a constant peak where it just goes up. It's a constant up and down. It plateaus. It crashes. It boosts up. How do you just psychologically ride that?
You just have to go with the flow. I don't know how else to say it. Like, really, there's no secret sauce to it, my friend. It's just going with the flow. Yeah, I mean, we all have things that we obsess over in this, but really, like, you can't let that drive your success. Otherwise, it will crush you. That's the best I can say. And I've seen it crush people. So really, you have to focus on doing the best job that you can and creating the very best content, making your show stand out from the rest. And that's all you can do. That's the very best that you can do. And I know it sounds easier said than done, but really that's the key that works for me.
So would you say you're a very even keel personality, even outside the pod? Because it seems like
most of the time.
Yeah, it sounds like people who are successful, I think, tends to be more even keel. Those who get either very excitable or very down, I think can get wiped out pretty easily in something like this.
100%. Yeah, you can't let that drive you.
And one thing I really do like about what you do as well, you host a lot of conferences on podcasting where you're basically teaching people, I guess, how to successfully podcast, right?
Yeah, I've been very lucky that all kind of was born out of the pandemic, and really just being asked and being given chances to do things. But yeah, I mean, any chance that I can help somebody or be there, because I know when I started podcasting, there wasn't a lot of resources. So, I'm open to helping people as much as I can. 100%.
Do you ever get concerned that by teaching people how to podcast, you're kind of helping your competition on some level?
Not really, because there's plenty of room at the table. I mean, I guess you could look at it that way, but you can't, because there's only so many podcasts. There's only so many guests. I don't know. I want to see people succeed. If somebody can do my show or a show better, then I say go for it, because that only drives me to be better.
Do you find that podcasting is competitive, or do you think there's just so many potential listeners out there that you're not really pulling from the other shows?
No, I mean, my show is different from the next guy's. I mean, we all might share the same people, but your listenership is different than mine, and mine is different from the next person. So it is competitive, obviously, because we all want the exclusive, but you have to look at it in the terms of just, it's a healthy competition, but you can't let it drive you. I mean, I am a competitive person, but I'm not going to burn somebody just to get the next thing, if that makes any sense. And there are people that probably would do that, but you can't think that way or it'll crush you.
I definitely agree with you there. I do find the community aspect of podcasting helpful. I mean, I know me and you have talked back and forth about certain guests, when to contact, things of that nature. And I do find that is just as constructive as building other relationships as well. Because you do get tips, and the tips you've given me are helpful. The tips I'm sure I've given you have been helpful, even though on both sides, obviously they've not always worked out. Because like I said, obviously Howard Mandel never worked out for me, unfortunately. But but I think that just having that communication is helpful to know when to ask. And I think the tips we've given each other have been valuable.
I agree. It's been a fun relationship.
I appreciate that. So what are the big guests that are coming down the pipe through?
Well, I mean, at this point, I've kind of recorded everything. I mean, I have a few folks from shows coming on here and there, from TV, and a couple of things here and there, but I'm getting ready to go on vacation next week, so I've kind of slowed down a little bit. But I mean, I've got, somebody coming on tomorrow from the show The Shy on Showtime. I've got some press conferences next week for the new Dynasty show on the CW. So just a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's always exciting.
Well, like I said, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. Like I said, I've been, an envious of your podcast for a while. You're one of the podcasts that I always have my eye out on, trying to see what's going on with you. And it was a great pleasure to pick your brain and find out how another one does it.
Absolutely. Well, you have an amazing show as well. You do a fantastic job, and always helpful as best as I can. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Totally my pleasure. Thank you so much, Brett.
Spaghetti! And we're back.
That's right. We are back. Back in the saddle again. Well, I hope you guys really, really enjoyed that as much as we did making it for you. And if you liked what you heard and you want to hear more, you got to go check out spoilerverse.com, because at spoilerverse.com, we have a plethora, amazing directors and artists of all walks of life, and editors and writers. And oh my God, are you a lover of comic books like we are? Then there's so many amazing people from the comic book world over at spoilerverse.com. And I highly implore you to go there and check it out.
Yeah, and while you're there, you can check out all the other podcasts on our network, like Bridges and Geekdoms and Funny Book Forensics and Haphazard Adventures and Nerds from the Crypt and so many more.
Misery
We put out
Point Radio.
episodes all the time. Go check all of them out. And check out all of the reviews and previews and articles we have going up every single day for you. Every day on spoilerverse.com for you to check out and to read and to love and to like and to comment. We have a store link. You want to help support the site? You can do it two ways. One, go to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/spoilercountry, or go to our store link in the middle of the site there and get a t-shirt, a face mask, a hoodie, something, look fly as hell, and help support the site when you do that, because we get $1 or $2. And, maybe you want to talk to us. If you do, you can do it obviously on all the socials, but if you go to scpod.us/discord, you can join our public Discord server and come.
Do you listen to podcasts that sound like this? Hey, welcome back to the Super OK Podcast, where our audio sounds mediocre.
Or do you prefer podcasts that sound more like this? Crisp, clear, fun, easy to listen to, and full of awesomeness? Well, then you should check out Spoiler Country, hosted exclusively over at spoilerverse.com.